tower troops, new evolutions, game-changing updates, and a brand new champion. 2024 has been a year full of surprises in Clash Royale. We have a total of 119 cards now. Sounds unbelievable, right? After millions of battles this year, which cards do you think were most loved by the players? And which cards received the most hate in 2024? Let's find out. So starting off at number 5 on the list of the most loved cards, we have the Knight. Despite receiving multiple nerfs throughout the year, the Knight has been fairly consistent in terms of win percentage and usage rates. Currently, the Knight sits at a great 54% win rate. Decks like Graveyard, Logbait, and Expo have constantly relied on the Knight this year. Loved by the pros and casuals alike, the Knight acts as the perfect mini-tank for your win condition. The evolved Knight has seen the most success in Graveyard decks, where its ability to take critical hits shines. The Knight absorbs all the hits from enemy towers and troops, while the Graveyard plus Poison combo wrecks the opponent. The evolved Knight is also a great counter to the annoying Siege archetype. Expo and Mortars are no match for him. After 3 nerfs this year, people have started viewing the Knight as a fairly balanced card. While being a viable card at top ladder, the Knight has also received love in mid ladder. He's a good counter to popular mid ladder cards like the Mega Knight and Wizard. And because the Knight is quite easy to upgrade, players love using him. Plus, he comes with an awesome mustache that's hard to rival. Starting off the most hated list, at number 5 we have the Dagger Duchess. Oh dear, remember the time when it was released? It'll surely bring you some nightmares, especially if you were a cycle player. The Dagger Duchess was released as the 3rd tower troop in April, and boy did it break the game on release. It seemed like it had infinite daggers. The Duchess would counter entire pushes all by herself, leaving players clueless. And to counter the Dagger Duchess and make her ineffective, you needed her to use up all her daggers, which was tricky because most cards would die to it very quickly and the person playing Dagger Duchess wouldn't need to use Elixir. This in turn allowed them to gain a massive Elixir advantage. The tower troops single-handedly killed the entire bait archetype. The whole meta was filled with beatdown decks just because of how strong the Dagger Duchess was. In fact, she was used in 65% of the decks on ladder. Every single deck that finished top 10 in May had the Dagger Duchess. Complaints about her flooded social media. People were complaining about how unfair the Duchess was and how she ruined the game for them. The card had to be nerfed brutally 3 times before it would eventually drop out of the meta. But the 3 months in which the Dagger Duchess was viable was perhaps one of the darkest phases of this year. Speaking of bad times, which is your worst memory in Clash Royale? Comment down below. Number 4 on the list of most loved cards this year is the Mini Pekka. I have to confess that I didn't put it on this list just because we share a common love for pancakes, but because of how useful the card is. The Mini Pekka is one of the most loved cards in mid ladder because of how easy it is to use and the value it provides. You don't need to use any proper placements or timings to unlock the card's full potential. It's your typical high DPS card that you can always rely on to counter those annoying beatdown pushes. It has a 25% use rate on ladder, which is quite good for a mini tank. The Mini Pekka has been used together with Giant and Goblin Giant decks with great success. These decks rely on punishing your opponent if they make a mistake, and what card is better to do that job than the Mini Pekka? Those Mini Pekka hits on the towers feel so satisfying, right? As we wait for the Mini Pekka evolution, one thing's for sure. Mini Pekka not only cooks great pancakes, it also cooks the bad players in mid-ladder. Okay, so at number 4 on the most hated list of 2024, we have the newest card in the game, Goblinstein. So, I don't know whose idea it was to introduce such a broken card mechanic in the game, but I know for sure that they didn't playtest the card enough. 66% usage rate with a 56% win rate. Yes, these numbers are real, and still these numbers don't even do justice to how overpowered Goblinstein is. If you know how to use the card correctly, your opponent is getting crushed. Many people complain that the Doctor has too much HP, and they're right. Surviving a Pekka hit is not only crazy, but it makes no sense at all. The card almost always guarantees a positive Elixir trade because often you end up spending more than you would like to defend the monster. And on top of that, all you need is only 2 Elixir to decimate entire pushes using the Goblinstein's ability. If you don't have proper ranged troops or buildings to counter the card, there isn't really much you can do against it. The card is easy to use, and there's a big possibility that it might become a mid-ladder menace in the upcoming months. Pro players have been complaining about the card being unhealthy for the game ever since it was released. Apparently, another nerf seems to be on the horizon, but despite being out only for 2 months, Goblinstein has made itself known as one of the most hated card releases ever in Clash Royale. What do you think is the most hated card release of all time? Next up, taking the number 3 spot on the most loved cards list is the Log. It's incredibly versatile, knocks back troops, crushes swarms, and has cool-looking spikes. And all of that for just 2 elixir. What other reason do you need to love this card? The Log is the pillar of almost every archetype. X-Bow, Hog, Royal Giant, Goblin Drill, Bait, Mortar, you just name it. 2024 has seen the rise of a lot of swarm cards, thanks to a lot of goblins invading Clash Royale. Thanks to the Log, they've been kept in check. Log is the number 1 preferred small spell of pros and is present in almost all top ladder decks. A big reason for the Log's popularity is the rise of Evolved Goblin Drill in 2024. The Log is still a major counter to the Drill, making the card a must-have in your deck. It's also helpful in taking out the Evolved Wizard's shield, which makes him vulnerable. These are just some of the uses for the Log. The card alone is single-handedly preventing toxic metas in the game. With a 35% use rate on ladder, the Log has been one of the most used cards in the game throughout the year. No surprises there. But you know what's surprising? The Log can actually talk. Well, all this talk is making me thirsty, so while I get a glass of water, make sure to like and subscribe. Okay, back to the most hated cards list now. Imagine a card having 83% use rate. You may think I'm kidding. Well, I'm not. Coming in at number 3 on the most hated list is the Goblin Machine. Oh my, where do I even begin? Let's rewind back to June. The Goblins had just invented a new way of ruining Clash Royale in the form of Goblin Machine. But why was literally everyone in the community frustrated about the card on its release? Maybe because it was shooting rockets out of its back, and do you know what was worse? Those rockets had the same damage as an actual rocket, both on troops and crown towers. That was seriously so broken that calls for an emergency nerf were all over social media. The card has generated hate not just towards itself, but towards Supercell as well. What were the game devs thinking? How can they release a card in such a game-breaking state? Were there no playtesters left at Supercell? Constant hate was flying everywhere after what are considered as the most toxic 48 hours in Clash Royale history. Supercell dropped a heavy emergency nerf to the Goblin Machine. The Goblin Machine's rocket was nerfed to oblivion, but the card still packed a punch. After more series of complaints, 2 weeks later, another nerf had to be deployed, this time targeting the hit point of the machine. The Goblin Machine was nerfed to death. But after all that was witnessed in June, who could blame Supercell? Despite brutal nerfs, the card continued to receive hate because of how inconsistent its attacking pattern was. The Goblin Machine remains in the shadows now, but the chaos and hatred it had generated during its launch was unlike anything we'd seen before. Moving on to the top 2 of the most loved cards list, we have everyone's favorite cycle card, the Ice Spirit. Everyone just loves the cute frosty fella. It's a quick cycle card you can fit in most decks. Ice Spirit has very simple but useful mechanics. You can pull off some crazy defenses combining the Ice Spirit with other cards, like Skeletons and Ice Spirit versus Mega Knight to get your King Tower activated. It's a very straightforward card, and you know what you're gonna get out of it. Despite a rather bad start to the year, the Evolved Ice Spirit has recently begun to receive a lot of love from players. With an 18% use rate and 53% win rate currently, the card is becoming increasingly popular day after day. It's used in various popular decks such as Goblinstein, Royal Hogs, and Hog Cycle. All these decks rely on the brilliance of the Ice Spirit on defense. When it's in cycle, it makes it almost impossible for a beatdown push like Royal Giant or Balloon to break through. And it feels like the cycle players constantly get it in cycle every time, making it almost impossible for the opponent to get any damage. The Ice Spirit is finally getting the love it deserved after a long time, and I'm excited to see what's next for our little friend. The amount of broken cards released this year is unreal, and our second most hated card of the year is no different. It's none other than the Void. No other spell has ever sparked more controversy than the Void on initial release. The card wasn't just broken, it was absurdly broken. Imagine countering an entire Lumberloon push for just 3 elixir, or getting a positive elixir trade countering an elixir collector, hog rider, or even an archer queen. The Void wasn't just broken, it was totally unfair. The card was doing earthquake level damage to buildings, rocket level damage to troops, and poison level damage to crown towers. It was like combining all the best spells of the game into a single all-powerful spell. And if you wanted to counter Void, you needed to place half a dozen elixir worth of troops next to the thing you want to protect. Void was released such that grouped units would reduce its effectiveness. But for a card which was meant to be weak against swarms, it would totally destroy them too. The Void's first 2 hits would destroy the swarms, and the final hit would destroy whatever troop or building you were trying to protect. The community went into outrage over the Void from the first day itself. The whole concept of the card was just dumb, they said. Supercell had to respond, and after a series of heavy nerfs in the next 3 months, Void fell out of the meta, but not before it had unleashed unimaginable chaos. Finally, for the most loved Clash Royale card of the year, drumroll please, we have the Princess. But wait, I'm not talking about the regular princess. The real MVP this year has been the Tower Princess. Despite the release of 2 new tower troops, the Cannoneer and Dagger Duchess, it's the Tower Princess which has been a symbol of consistency throughout 2024. Both Cannoneer and Dagger Duchess eventually fell out of the meta, but the Tower Princess remained consistent both on top ladder and mid ladder. The Cannoneer was bad against swarms and graveyard in general, while beatdown decks were the weakness of Dagger Duchess. But since the Tower Princess is decent against both beatdown and cycle decks, players don't have to worry about getting hard countered just because of the tower troop they're using. And that's why it's the most loved card throughout the year. With an unmatched 84% usage rate now in the game, it's clear that the Tower Princess has prevailed as the best tower troop, and players will continue to rely on her always. So here we are. Now, before I reveal the most hated card of the year, a fair warning. This is going to be a lot of ranting, so be prepared. The most hated card of the year is none other than the Evolved Pekka. If you expected anything else, you haven't been playing the same Clash Royale as me. So what's the problem with the Evolved Pekka? Well, it hardly ever dies. For real, they might as well just release an immortal card at this point, because this is outrageous. This card heals infinitely, and every hit from it just feels like a dagger through your heart. The one thing that was supposed to counter Pekka was swarms, and the Evolved Pekka is designed to kill that entire concept. She can totally destroy a whole army of swarms by herself, as well as have enough HP left to take down the entire crown tower. How is that even allowed in the game? Pekka had already received a range buff this year, and the release of her evolution made her even more broken than ever. There is no one on the 1 counters for the Evo Pekka really other than the Infernos, and a single zap would crush them too. The meta became extremely unplayable just because of this single Evo, which was literally everywhere. The card dominated in ladder and even the 2024 CRL World Finals in its broken state. Pros, casuals, content creators, all were united in hating the Evolved Pekka because the card had made the game totally unenjoyable. Not a day went by without anyone criticizing the dev team for releasing a beyond broken evolution. The Pekka Evolution finally received a couple of nerfs recently, but many still see the card as a sign of worry. So we've talked about the most hated and most loved cards of Clash Royale, but which cards are the most underrated and most overrated? Click on this video to find out.